Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception, ideas on a page, through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Laura Evans. I'm a fellow set decorator with the SDSA today. And I'm pleased to welcome our revered guests, Mr. John D. Kretschmer, production designer, and Summer Eubanks, our set decorator. We're here to discuss their creative collaboration on the Peacock limited series, A Friend of the Family. So what I'd love to know, first of all, is John and Summer, how did you get your start in the business? And as a child, what were your influences?
Well, I learned television early. I interned at the television station in Charlotte early on. When I went to college, we started a student television station at UNC Chapel Hill. I was one of the founding members. Dino De Laurentiis was building a movie studio in Wilmington in 1984, right as I graduated. So I went down there and pressed my face against the fence, and I landed on my feet in the set decoration department. I didn't even know the department existed, but I fell in love and I never looked back.
Did you have any favorite films or television shows that resonated with you that made you think, I'd really like to do that?
Really, my influence would be Monty Python and the sketch comedies and those kind of things that also, they told the story well and they did it well with art direction. That's kind of where my head was back in the day.
Well, I was more in the direction of acting and theater in high school and college. And then in the 80s, my ex-husband and I had a business building sets. And then some of our clients asked us if we could actually start getting the furniture and stuff, the dressing for their videos. And so I started doing that. And then a movie came to town. It's called Born to Race. It's a very bad movie. And so I got hired on that for like $40 a day as a prop assistant. And so I worked in props for a while, and then I did on-set dressing. And then I finally worked on a job. It was called Eddie, which was Whoopi Goldberg. And I was a buyer for Roberta Holinko. And I loved it. And like John said, I fell in love. I said, okay, this is what I want to do. Because before I'd bounced around, I'd done all kinds of other things in the industry, and which has served me well, because I understand, when I go into construction and I have an argument with that construction coordinator, I can understand where they're coming from. And scenics, I love scenics. They're always my best friend. But I understand what they're doing. I understand what it takes to be a on-set dresser and a lead person. That's the only job I haven't done, but I'm not dead yet. So I love decorating. That's been what I've been doing probably since the mid-90s.
How did you both meet, and how did that production designer set decorator relationship evolved over such a long period of time?
Is Homeland the first time we worked together?
No, Army Wives.
Army Wives, that's right.
Yeah. But we met, I think the first time I actually met you, I had heard your name, of course, but you were our BA. And I was working on a little independent film outside of Asheville. And I think you came to the set and I met you physically.
And then also through Chuck Potter, I think was a common connection.
Oh, yeah. Chuck is a common.
Chuck Potter's a decorator, dear friend, and who I think is an amazing decorator, and Summer and Chuck, I consider them as peers, and is two matching bookends in capability and talents. My MO always as a production designer is to hire the best decorator you can find and then get out of the way. And Summers helped teach me that and help me learn that along the way.
He is great about trusting and that how important that is to have trust between a designer and a decorator both ways. So that's a boost.
And Summer and I work, I think, very well this way, is when it comes down to the character details, particularly on a show like A Friend in the Family, where we have the resources. We know exactly the details of these families and these livelihoods. For me as a designer, to dive into that granular level of storytelling, I can get quite bogged down. And I often find myself, if it's between the director and Summer myself, I end up being a third opinion. So I will often, if I can, back out of that. Let Summer work directly with the director on the fine character details. I need to stay ahead of her, make sure the sets are getting ready. And I think that's how I get a better product as a production designer. I get more breadth, and not only with the decorator, I like for our entire department, I like everyone in the department to feel like they have ownership and leeway to make decisions and bring their ideas to the table.
So let's jump into the meat of the show, just beginning with locations, because I think it's important for people to know that sometimes we have these tax incentive programs and we do go to a place like Georgia, which might not be locally relevant to Idaho. So how did you guys make that work? I heard that you scouted 1,000 miles, John, in one of your interviews, and let's talk about that.
Well, number one, that's why we have an art department. If you want to shoot on the moon, you can't go to the moon, but a good art department can deliver the moon to you. So that's the basic reason for our existence, I think, is to provide the settings where they need to be. Georgia is a tough choice for Idaho. I spent at least 2 weeks. I think we literally clocked 1,000 miles driving around Atlanta looking for our location. Luckily and very uniquely, I think we found possibly the only house in the United States that could actually double for the Broberg house. And it had to meet a lot of criteria. One, it needed to have at least a little bit of a big sky feel in a city that has a forest canopy throughout. So we needed the house to be up on a hill, so we have at least a bit of a horizon. The house we found was unoccupied, which meant that we could basically own it for the show. And then thirdly, we renovated. We went in and knocked out windows and this is actually almost duplicate the actual Berchtold to a house to a T. And the most important thing about being able to match it exactly on the exterior allowed us to match the floor plan exactly for our interiors. And that's very important because the floor plan of this house, the layout of the house and the basement below was very much one of the tools that Bob Berchtold used to ploy his craft. It was use a term, a bit of a moonshot that we were able to do this and give the director the exact conditions that existed in Idaho in 1972.
The Brobergs house was very modest. And the Broberg house, we strove to match as accurately as possible to their real house. And the Berchtold house, the way we approached it was that they had more money. So with the Berchtold house, we had a little bit more leeway so that we would have as big a jump as possible from the Broberg house to the Berchtold house.
Amazing. I'm looking at this balustrade and the posts here in the entryway. And in the first episode, this created a really beautiful proscenium for the young Jan to sing her song. And I wonder, was that planned because the lights looked like a theater and the posts were this proscenium?
Yeah, it was planned. That was one of the things where Celiana, we met with her and she described how she wanted that to look.
I really loved the little picnic scene that was created, and you can really tell how the manipulation was starting to be set and just embracing into the family. And oh, it's a cute little picnic. Tell me about the challenges and the fun that it might have been to find all the objects that go into that room.
That was a lot of fun. Like that lamp right there, the oil lamp, that's beautiful. And DPs love that that kind of thing. Any kind of like interesting lighting is a real passion for me. Finding things for the period was not that difficult because those things are still around, and the period is different enough from today that it kind of sings, it kind of says itself. Whereas if you're doing like the 80s or 90s, that's hard because there's not a big enough jump yet.
The player piano, was that in the script? Because I find that to be a distraction that just kind of creates a little chaos in the background and fun, but it's creepy.
It was in the script, and it was actually a real thing in the Birchtold house. And yes, it is creepy. Watching the show, every minute is uncomfortable. The show is uncomfortable, and that's what it should be. And that's the story that we're telling. And so hopefully what we've done with design and set dressing helps tell that story.
Yeah, for sure. I heard that you changed out the windows, and did you put blinds in there for the noir effect? And what was that like, changing out those windows?
In the Broberg house, it was actually just to match the actual architecture of the real house. The whole idea was that the story would start in light and move to a shadow. So we prepared for both, for bright, light, sunny world, and also a darker, more high contrast, creepy world when the story needed it.
And how much access did you each have to Jan?
Oh, it was amazing.
Yeah.
She was very approachable, and anytime we would go through Nick mostly, but we were able to ask her anything we needed to ask her. So she was really, very involved in the whole process.
We had an embarrassment of riches in terms of the resources for this story. Beginning with the documentary, which tells the story very completely, and that is a litmus test. I remember I sent the documentary to Summer and says, watch it and make sure you want to work on it. It's a gut punch of a story. Secondly, we had Jan in the family. We had access to her, an incredible trove of archives that told the entire story, including everything we had on B as well, down to police reports, childhood photographs. So we had very little excuse not to get the story told correctly.
And it was difficult to work on. It was difficult material.
Nick is an incredible writer. I mean, just the way that he tells this story. What was that like to work with Nick as a storyteller?
He was very accessible to me. I could go and talk to him anytime, that I wanted to, and run things by him. The whole production, upper tier production people were very accessible. The producers, the writers, directors, everyone had the same goal, to tell this story as accurately as possible.
Working with Nick, since we had the documentary evidence for this story, the job there was to enable him to carry this more to narrative. And I think that was the initial journey working with Nick. And once these first couple of sets landed and the first episode landed, then I think we all were in agreement that yes, we can use the documentary information, but yeah, we can err as we need to do a better job at telling the story.
You guys have worked all over the globe. What was it like to work in Atlanta to collect all these treasures and to put them together and to make them work?
Yeah, I love working in Atlanta. There's an amazing crew of people that I try to hire anytime I work there. And I do the same thing like John does with me. It's like, bring me your ideas. I send someone out to shop and I say, look, if you see something great, don't be limited to what I've asked for. Bring me a picture of it. I have amazing people in Atlanta, so I loved working there. And Atlanta has good resources. There's a lot of good thrift shops. There's a lot of good consignment stores and places that specialize in 70s stuff. And so there was a lot of good resources there. That being said, we also, as always, do a lot of stuff online. Because sometimes by the time you drive somewhere in Atlanta, get something and bring it back, you spend an entire day. So you can't spend your resources that way. So there's a lot of small stuff that we would get online, like detail things. And then Jan actually gave us some of her own belongings, some of her books and stuff, which we duplicated, and put in that. And this little badge thing that the Mormon girls do, it's kind of like a Girl Scout badge thing. We created that, and that was a real coup for my art department minions because they created that thing from scratch.
Wow.
Just a picture, and it was amazing. You see it hanging on her wall when she's a teenager. One of my buyers did the actual embroidery and made the actual buttons with her Cricut and created this thing from scratch, and it was amazing.
It's so great and fun to hear how people come together and make things. And I love doing that as a set decorator myself, just making things with your crew and having the input of everyone who contributes. I found this, I found that. One of the things, since it was a period piece, and I know nowadays it's problematic with using real artwork and newspaper clippings. And I saw that you had David Cassidy, one of my childhood favorites. Tell everybody about the permissions that we have to get to make that happen.
It was a huge part of her childhood, was this David Cassidy. So we spent the money for it. But otherwise, we had a brilliant graphic designer. Our designer created all these posters. That horse picture, we got that cleared. That was actually an embroidery from a thrift store.
Even though needlepoint and embroidery and paint by numbers were so popular in that era, we can't necessarily use what we find because we get in trouble.
Not anymore. We used to be able to get away with that, but no more.
Yeah.
It's everything. Like everything on this wall right here was created.
Yeah, in this day and age, you not only need one graphic designer, it actually takes two on most jobs. And this was no exception. And Anna Shashita, who was our designer on this, who did a lot of Homeland, she does the work of two herself. So her plus one equals three graphic designers. And
that's true. That's
true. And the very important thing about graphic designers, and Anna's one of those for sure, is many of them are really great artists, but they also have to be time managers. They have to help manage the clearance process. And, and it's very rare where you get a good designer that can do both. And it's become one of the most important crafts in a modern day art department. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk about the wallpaper. John, do you typically pick the wallpaper in your department?
I'll put up an idea, then I'll absolutely turn that over to Summer.
That's the other thing I love is wallpaper, lighting, wallpaper. We did some really fun wallpapers in here on this show.
And as I recall, Summer, you were working very closely with Nick on these wallpapers as well.
Yeah, and with Celiana and whichever director was shooting that episode. Remember the one, Jan's, with the big blue sunflowers? Everybody got scared of, and then we stuck with it, and it paid off because it ended up looking great. I like the way it turned out.
Yeah, this is really cool. And did she actually have this floating?
Yes, she did.
B built that. B built that for her.
Wow.
And that's the actual lamp. We found that on eBay. And she was into horses, so we had a bunch of the molded plastic horses that were popular at the time.
How did you take this house in Atlanta and create all these different areas?
We found the hero house for Broberg, the exterior only. We built our interiors.
Okay.
And then with the help of Eliza, our pilot director, we found the Birchtold house just around the corner. Literally the walk that they take in the movie is literally the walk that they took on the location. Those houses were 4 houses apart. The exterior of the Birchtold inspired the design for the interior. And then taking the notes and understanding what Birchtold's house was like in reality, architecturally, we're nowhere close to what happened in reality, but we're very much there in spirit. This elevated decor, which allowed it to separate the two. Going back to the Broberg house, we didn't have the floor plans for the actual house, but we had a ton of forensics information. Jan had taken a video camera and revisited her childhood home. And by watching, I could piece together exactly how this house existed within inches of what it actually was.
Are you able to bring a construction coordinator, or do you bring your art directors at least?
I typically don't travel with an entourage. And I'm very loyal to my crews, but also I'm very interested in discovering new crews and building new teams. Absolutely, I want to work with Summer if I can, but my first job will be to make sure I don't have that resource in the local market. And I think the other part of that is if you hold a team together, hold a stable together for many jobs, you're going to kind of become compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And I'm weary of lack of growth in that situation.
Yeah.
That's the way I enjoy working.
That's amazing. It speaks to the team spirit and a sense of adventure and really being able to work with and meet new people and learn new things. I love that.
Yeah, I find the same thing. If you work with the same person over and over and over and over again, there becomes a codependency that is just it's not healthy for the overall project.
Two of the great exteriors that I noticed were the beautiful flower shop and the furniture store. Can we talk a little bit about each of those?
Well, what I'd start with the challenges of shooting Georgia for Idaho. And while Atlanta is a very resourceful metropolitan area, we were very challenged in finding a small town, main street look that could play the part. And when it was all said and done, there was really only one choice. And we all kind of came to agreement that Griffin, Georgia would be the role that would have to play. We did have an empty storefront. You can see in this picture here, it's a very close match to the actual thing. And Broberg, had the florist shop in the middle of town. His twin brother ran the bank across the street. So it's very much the heart and soul of these kind of businesses in these small towns. It's the heart and soul of the town. And then ultimately, B. Birchtold commissioned an arson and burned the thing to the ground. And that happens in our story. And again, we had a real challenge to figure out how to do that logistically and within the limitations of our show. And B kind of flew into town. And he came into Pocatello and he bought a furniture business and kind of turned it into a discount furniture warehouse. And so fortunately, in our little town of Griffin was this beautiful existing furniture company that was locked in the 70s.
I didn't see it until we actually almost until we tech scouted it. And so I had that much time to actually get it right. And we talked about, well, maybe we can leave this and this and this. And then when I go in there and I start dressing, I said, that's not right. That's not right. So everything pretty much went to the back of the store. And we went to a prop house and just filled up the truck with furniture and brought it in and just dressed it in like little vignettes, like a furniture store would do. But it was a big day. We had dressers because we had to dress the streets as well.
Oh, yeah.
We had to do all that, and we were shooting it all in like 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
So we had to get the flower shop and all the streets and the storefronts and this big thing done all pretty much in the same couple of days. So it was plus it was an hour drive for most of us.
Were there any happy accidents, like something really challenging that turned out to be a really beautiful thing for you?
In our final episode, or the spring dance, we needed a high school basketball gym. And we almost decided to go shoot it in Los Angeles because we could not find a gym. And at the last minute, we found this thing. The building was shut down, had no air conditioning, no electricity or anything. I don't know if it's a happy accident or not, but it was just perfect shape and size for what we needed to do. And it ended up being quite spectacular.
Yeah, and what a beautiful set.
Lauren Wolfstein was the director and Cilian on this, and she had very specific ideas. And this is very much her ideas that we manifested for the director.
We did a really elaborate rig to hang all of those stars and stuff
Another thing that was almost as unique as finding the Broberg house was the GMC 260, the motorhome. He drove a bright orange GMC 260, and we were very fortunate to find one in working order. And it played both in Atlanta and in California. So that was a challenge, getting that one in both places, keeping it running, keeping it alive, keeping it air conditioned. It was a very, very important set piece, and we were very fortunate to get it exactly right.
Can we just talk about creating Mexico? What was that like for both of you?
Summer stayed back in Atlanta. We did this in California, and very fortunate. Had a great team in California that picked up the pieces of the show and brought it home. It was a very important role that the California crew played.
Let's just talk about lighting just a little bit more and how you pick your fixtures.
There was one very specific light fixture that was requested in the Birchtold house when Jan talks to Sister Gail and they come together and there's a cone of light. And so we found a period appropriate overhead fixture, that was very specific. Otherwise, I always show fixtures to the DP before we buy them. And then ideally we have a fixtures person, especially on a period show, because what you buy is going to be broken.
Right.
That will fix it and get it wired and make it camera ready. Otherwise, I build a storehouse of lighting, lamps and shades and everything. And then that way I have stuff to pull from. And then sometimes there's some good salvage places in Atlanta.
We had the luxury to have adequate time to put these sets together. We have fairly long range plans with the cinematographers. And then the challenge on this show and many shows is that all those plans are well made and thought of, but the cinematographers are end up under such a huge time crunch when they're shooting because the schedule was not friendly. And these folks did the best they could, really, under some intense situations to get these scenes shot. That's me a long way going about that the practicals really mattered, because the practicals in that situation have to carry the load. They have to carry a lot of the work.
I find that more and more typical, actually, these days, that we do, as decorators, do end up almost lighting the set, with our fixtures, with our practicals.
Were these all incandescent?
Primarily, occasionally, they might put one of their LED things, like I think maybe at the green and gold ball fixtures may have put some LED strips, their own personal, the better LEDs, not something that we can buy as decorators. But I just watched that. I was really happy with the way that rose wall turned out.
Yes.
With photographs, that looked really good.
That's so beautiful. So beautiful. How do you guys each create your work-life balance at the end of a rough show, at the end of the day? How do you find your center?
Well, one thing I'll tell you that was unique about this show was COVID. For the first time, I would often walk into the art department and no one's there. But it gave us some new freedoms. It made us more efficient. You don't have to run back to the office for a production meeting, particularly in Atlanta.
I found that true as well, as being able to work from wherever, especially like you said in Atlanta. As far as like turning it off when I go home, I've been able to do that fairly effectively in the last 10 years. I used to work, go home and I'd still be working.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute. So I don't do that anymore. I feel like I finally figured out how to separate those two.
End of the day, we worked really hard at Summer and I. We had to treat this subject matter very delicately and respectfully. Every step of and every member of the crew had to. And I think that's possibly our biggest accomplishment, is that we're able to respectfully handle this material and do it without getting hurt, without creating more problems, and doing it accurately and fairly to the people that were involved.
Having had these marvelous careers and more to come, what would you say to your younger selves, knowing what you know now?
Well, I sort of came into this business as a technician. I think I'm most fortunate that what I know as a designer, I learned in the business. And that's how I learned my craft. So what would my advice be to someone young is don't do it that way. The art department is such a very interesting and unique department. We host the weirdos and the misfits and the people that don't conform. I've worked side by side with PhDs and college and high school dropouts. I would say to young people, know your worth, understand your worth, be willing to learn and make mistakes, be willing to take criticism and understand criticism and learn from it. And I've always said, I'm very good at making mistakes. I'm even better at fixing them. And you end up finding better art often along the way.
So, Summer, what about you?
I would tell her, learn to negotiate better when I'm making my deal.
Oh,
Just learn to negotiate. It's like what John said, know your worth. Because I went into it, in kind of like an organic way. I never knew anything about that part of the business, how to negotiate a deal. So I would say that.
well, on behalf of the SDSA and John and Summer and everyone else that we can't see here that contributed to this amazing series for Peacock, I want to thank everyone and encourage everyone to watch this beautifully done project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.